Now we're talking in Chapter 12 about the classical concerto. I'm going to be brief here because there's not a whole lot of things to talk about, but I will just discuss a bit of the concepts of the classical concerto. The concerto in the classical period was to feature a soloist, and it was usually the composer who would be the featured soloist. So Mozart would write a piano concerto, and he would be the pianist who would demonstrate that music. And so when you hear a classical concerto, you're going to hear usually the orchestra begin the theme. And then that theme would then be played by the soloist with some background accompaniment with the rest of the orchestra. And when that happens, it becomes a double sonata form. So there's two themes that are repeated, the themes are repeated. And so that's why on page, if I can find it one more time here, on page number 131, it talks about the double exposition sonata form. Don't be too confused about that. It's just this regular sonata form just with double the number of themes because of the soloist. I want to get right to talking about the concerto and specifically the cadenzas. The cadenza either happened, and it usually happened in the third movement of the sonata form. In the concerto form, we drop the third middle movement, the minuet and trio movement. So we're doing a fast movement in the beginning, usually indicated by allegro. Or molto allegro vivace, which means quick. Middle movement, slow, adagio, andante movement. The third movement also being quick, a fast movement. Well, it's usually during the third movement where the orchestra would sustain a big chord. The soloist then would begin an improvised run of things that would be related to the material of the concerto. And then the orchestra would stop. The solos would continue for a few minutes, actually, just improvising material. That was in the classical period. Now, today, we don't do that. The soloists don't improvise. They play pre-written cadenzas that are published. We're not taught, for some reason, classical musicians are not taught to improvise like jazz musicians do or rock musicians just do naturally. Not taught to do that. But back in the day, back in the 18th and early 19th centuries, they did. They did improvise the music as they played. In one soloist that we're going to learn more about, Niccolo Paganini, was a violinist who, rumor has it, sold his soul to the devil to be able to play the violin. Was quite a featured soloist and would improvise. Not so much anymore. When Quantz wrote his wonderful concertos, and he wrote a lot of them, students today still play these Quantz, and especially the flute players for his soloists would play the Quantz concertos. They're still being played today. Wonderful. In a cadenza, the soloist would play, right? So at the end of the improvisation, the indication to the rest of the orchestra that, hey, it's time to finish this piece of music that we're doing so that you guys with your music stands can continue playing with me, the soloist. He or she, again, I keep doing that. There was never a she at this time. It was always the he, would finish by doing a trill. And so if I can get my camera on the guitar, I can show you what I'm talking about. So the trill would be this, just really, really fast. Okay, and so that would be a trill, or here, wherever the trill was, and they would just wiggle their fingers real quick to get this thing going, and that would indicate to the orchestra that, hey, I'm done, I'm ready to go on to the next stuff. So that's the concepts of the trill and the cadenza. Interesting thing on page 130, very well-written few paragraphs here about what composers need to know to write their music. Just be real brief about something to add to that. Let me do it in blue so you can see what I'm doing. When we're writing music, and this is just a visual representation of pitches that are high and low, most instruments will be playing their notes on the staff. Okay, so most of the little dots and dashes will be here somewhere on the staff. The range of most instruments are going to extend above the staff, so some high notes may be up here, and some low notes may be down here. It is improper for a composer to ask an instrument to play above their range or below their range. Some players can do it. There are physical limitations to the instrument that don't allow them to do that. So if they can do that, it might sound bad if they try to do that. if their instrument would even let them do that. So composers, when they're writing music, have to be cognizant of that and have to be aware that they can't do that. Also, they have to be aware that many notes in the low range of instruments that are together, that are happening at the same time, and to indicate stuff that happens at the same time, a composer has to write notes that are on top of each other. And I can demonstrate on the guitar what that is. What I've written here is, I'll do this little thing, is I have written an F chord. And if I did that F chord, actually I can't physically do that chord on the guitar, but I can do something similar. If I do those notes together, I might get this sound, which sounds really kind of clumpy and noisy because those notes aren't supposed to be played that low together. If I did the same thing up in a higher range, that makes a little more sense. Okay, so even up here, if I did that same thing, it would make more sense. That sounds a little better up here. It's the same three notes, but because it's in a higher range, it sounds better. This is a lower range, it's just clumped together. So composers have to be aware of that. So that's it for that particular chapter. Kept it real brief, and we'll go on to chapter number 13.